Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, June 13th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at the approval rating of President Trump in individual states. So the morning consult page is on your screen right now, mainly because I'm going to say that I'm probably not going to use this, possibly even for the remainder of the election. They haven't been updating, understandably, but they haven't been updating data for these upcoming or previous months. So I'm going to go ahead and use the civics data because I can actually, take a look at each individual demographic and adjust it based off of that. And it is very interesting once you actually go ahead and take a look at that. Number one, Donald Trump's approval rating has dwindled in a number of states. Even in comparison to his previous approval rating, right now on the civics poll, I believe he's on a negative 15% nationwide. Right after the COVID-19 situation happened, he was around negative 10. So I think this may lean a little bit further, away from Donald Trump in comparison to other polling firms, but it's practically right around the numbers right now. I think it's around 12, 13% nationwide for Donald Trump. So it's a little bit further to the left than, or at least against Donald Trump than some other polls may indicate. However, I will say that it is very informative to take a look at some of these states. So on your screen right now, they don't use a red and green map. Essentially, if it's blue, it means that they approve of Donald Trump in that state. And if it's orange, that means they disapprove of Donald Trump in that state, which honestly, these really do make sense. Donald Trump has only really had a solid hold on his base for just, obviously the past 4 years, but a lot of his base isn't necessarily super solid in some of these swing states. They voted for Donald Trump, because they thought that Hillary Clinton was a bad candidate, or they just wanted to see a Republican in office after 8 years of a Democratic presidency. But a lot of Trump supporters, or at least Trump voters, weren't necessarily diehard Trump voters. When you take a look at some of these states, Donald Trump won them by overwhelming margins. So it makes sense that he would be positively approved of in states such as Wyoming, where he has a 65% approval rating, or states, such as North Dakota, where it's 26%. It's weird that South Dakota is 12% in terms of net approved, which is really interesting to me that some of these states, like Kansas is 1. That one actually makes sense. I think that one could be pretty surprising in 2020. Not competitive, but might not be safe depending on what happens now. Nebraska +9. I mean, a lot of these southern states obviously approve of Donald Trump. I think West Virginia might be stronger than Wyoming. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. In terms of the rest of the states, Donald Trump is negatively approved of in. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these swing states and talk about why Donald Trump needs to be above ground in order for this to be a successful re-election bid. First of all, Texas, which is 38 electoral votes, is going to be a huge win for the Republican Party if they, hold on to it. Obviously, it's expected California would also be a huge win considering it's 55 electoral votes, but both of these usually vote separate ways. Texas is a Republican state, but California is a Democratic state. However, Texas has shown that it is narrowing up, whereas California is not. And Texas contains 38 electoral votes that would be absolutely crucial to Donald Trump if he is to win re-election. Right now, he has an overall net negative 2% in the state, which is not a good sign. Around this entire region, actually, minus 25 in Colorado, minus 10 in New Mexico, 21 in Nevada, and 15 in Arizona. While these numbers may be, I think, again, further away from Donald Trump than some polls do indicate, their national numbers are just a couple percentage points off of the other ones. A lot of them don't publish state-by-state data, but if they did, we possibly could see data such as this. I mean, it makes sense that he could be negative 21 in a state that he didn't win in 2016. I don't necessarily think that negative 25 is too realistic, but again, it is Colorado, and Joe Biden's probably going to carry it, possibly by 10, 11, 12% in the state. Instead of New Mexico, I think this one actually I expected to be more against Donald Trump than what this data suggests, but I will say that it is always interesting to take a look at this. I'm not the ones doing the polls, so I can't accurately comment on the validity of it or not. For Alaska, that's not competitive, but again, this is a solid Republican state, minus 13% for minus 3%, for Donald Trump. So that pretty much cuts off this half of the United States. Again, swing states, Texas, Arizona. Arizona is probably going to go to the Democratic Party. Even looking at this data, it only reinforces that point. But for Texas, I still think that Donald Trump could possibly edge it out. Ted Cruz had roughly the same approval rating when he won re-election in 2018. It was narrow. It was within 3 percentage points, but he did win regardless. So you can still be disapproved of in a state and still carry it. As we take a look at the Northeast, this one's pretty obvious. Maine disapproves of him heavily. New Hampshire, that makes sense. Taking a look at the rest of this area, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all double digits in the negative for President Trump. He won Wisconsin by 0.77%, Michigan by 0.27%, and Pennsylvania by 0.71%, I believe. When you look at that, actually, or maybe 7.2%, I just know it was very narrow. But when you take a look at these states themselves, it is pretty surprising to see that in a state Donald Trump sure carried, maybe by a small margin, but carried regardless, flipped after the first time in some of these states after around 3 decades. Pennsylvania, -11, Michigan, -14, and Wisconsin, -10. And that all makes sense. Number one, Donald Trump has been alienating a lot of these Rust Belt voters in the sense that a lot of those people that voted for him before voted for the presidential type of Donald Trump. The last 2 weeks of the campaign were crucial to Trump's reelection. It was a combination of Hillary Clinton's scandals resurfacing and Donald Trump putting on a very presidential act, which he very well could do in 2020. But a lot of his comments that he's been saying are going to outrage minority voters. Sure, they may not make up 10% of the population in states such as Wisconsin, but they will definitely make an impact across all 3 of these states. They will 100% be voting for the Democrats if they are voting. I mean, it's 90-8 on the national split, so you could expect something roughly around that, especially if it's coming from an urban area. It'll probably be more so like 93-4 in cities such as Milwaukee or Detroit or Philadelphia. Donald Trump single-handedly has inspired the Democratic Party to come out in droves in the midterm elections, in special elections, except for California, which I don't think is an indicator of a red wave when literally every other special election has proven otherwise, and midterm elections. And then you have to go ahead and take a look at the surrounding states. It's not just Donald Trump underwater in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. In states that he won nearly by 10% in 2016, states such as Iowa, -5, and Ohio, -7. Sure, the numbers do fare better than these 3 Rust Belt states. However, he did win these states in 2016. He won them by very substantial margins. So Donald Trump being underwater in some of these states doesn't show a good sign for his reelection bid. If a state voted for him by 10% and disapproves of him by 5%, that's a swing of 15% if we're talking about direct approval rating to vote. And obviously that's not how it always goes. However, I will say that being underwater in a state and nationwide by 15% is not a good position for your reelection bid. For Virginia, -20, that makes sense. North Carolina, -11. I think that is also very surprising. North Carolina voted to the Republican Party for the Republican Party back in 2016. It wasn't so much a swing state. Realistically, it was always lean R the entire election season. Yes, Hillary Clinton did lead in some polling data, but Donald Trump's margin of victory, I think, outperformed the polls by 3%. But North Carolina, I would say surprising. I mean, it, again, was a swing state in terms of the way that people treated it, but it wasn't usually supposed to be competitive. Obama only won it by 14,000 votes in 2008, and I get it. The Democrats always think this is our year. We'll take North Carolina, but usually it doesn't end up much. But now I will say Donald Trump probably has pushed away a lot of voters in states such as that, and North Carolina, 22% African-American population itself, is going to definitely see an increase in black turnout statewide, which could possibly land Joe Biden a victory in this state. In terms of his approval rating, it was a lot higher, obviously, when he had entered office. And Donald Trump's approval rating before the presidency cannot be compared to his approval rating as he holds the office. There's a difference between being a candidate and being likable as a candidate and having actual responsibilities. You may not like a person, but you can admire what they're doing with their position. Or you may not like what they're doing with their position, but like them as a person, which is why approval rating polls or favorability rating polls can't always be described the same as job approval polls. But in a presidential election year, if Biden is more popular than Trump, well, Trump is in office, so people may not necessarily like what he's doing, so they may opt for change. For Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, neither of them were in office. So the only person really to blame could have been Obama, but realistically, it would have to be each other. And that's why favorability polls were so popular in 2016, because that's the only thing we had. Neither of those two candidates were office holders at the time. So you couldn't really assess the way that they were doing their job during the presidential election campaign. But you definitely could do that for Donald Trump, but you can't do that so much for Joe Biden. So I guess it sort of favors Biden in that aspect. But, North Carolina, -11. Georgia, -9, which I think is actually really surprising. Georgia, we definitely could see an influx of Democratic voters in 2020, as long as they actually don't forget the voter code in certain precincts, which is really interesting, to say the least. But again, I really think that they should get their act together. I understand they're working with new equipment and everything, but this is our democracy, and you can't have people waiting in lines till 10 p.m. to vote, and a lot of people leaving the polling station because they couldn't vote. And obviously, that is a form of, whether it's intentional or not, voter suppression. And it's negligence by the state itself. And I think that a lot of states should look to Georgia and take a look at what happened in the primaries. And sure, a lot of it did run smoothly, but a lot of it didn't. And, a lot of people that came in to vote in person say they did not receive their mail-in ballot, despite the Secretary of State saying they released, I believe, 96% of voters' ballots. So it doesn't really make sense much. And for the state of Florida, -6. It is interesting that Trump is disapproved of more in North Carolina and Georgia. Again, those typically have a more Mitt Romney, John McCain type Republican base compared to Florida, which more so, I guess you could say, it's probably actually 50-50. So it does make sense. A lot of these Republicans, again, the same thing that the progressive Democrats did for Hillary Clinton in 2016, held their breath, voted for Donald Trump in 2016. It is possible that they vote for Joe Biden in 2020, which is why states such as Georgia and North Carolina and Florida are being targeted. But again, these two, Georgia and North Carolina, could actually be sleeper states. North Carolina more than Georgia, meaning the Republican Party could think they have a solid hold on them, but on election day, they could end up turning on them, very surprisingly, when no one would really expect it. So that's pretty much it in terms of Trump's nationwide approval. I'm actually going to go ahead and make another video probably sometime later, maybe if they have a July poll, or maybe later down in June, where I actually break down the demographics, because I promise it is very interesting to take a look at, to say the least. And I think that there's a lot of information to be gone through in that specific video, and I don't think that I want to draw this on any longer. This is just an approval rating update in each of the swing states, because it is very important to take a look at. Let me see if I missed any swing states. I guess you could characterize Minnesota right now -21, but other than that, I don't think I missed anything. I covered Maine, I covered New Hampshire, and this is on the civics.com page, so you can go ahead and look at it yourself and look at the demographics yourself, but I'm going to make a video about it later on. So again, thank you all for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please consider joining as a member on my channel, and I will see you all later today.